Frank Mitchell stepped out of his truck with a tired sigh, feeling the weight of his years in every joint. His body, marked by time and service to his country, reminded him every day of the sacrifices he had made. The southern sun shone brightly on his face, warm and familiar, as he stared at the worn Ethan's Diner sign. A faint smile appeared on his lips. This place had been a kind of refuge for him for years, a space where he found good food and friendly faces. As he entered the restaurant, the sound of the bell announced his arrival, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and bacon enveloped him, causing a growl in his stomach. Frank walked to his usual seat at the bar, nodding to some of the regulars who also knew him. However, something seemed different that day. The usual bustle of conversation was reduced to an awkward silence as soon as he entered. Frank felt glances over him, as if everyone was watching his every move. Trying to ignore that discomfort, he settled into a stool at the bar. However, he soon noticed that Ethan Barnes, the owner of the place, was watching him from the kitchen. At other times, Ethan would have given him a friendly smile, but this time his face seemed hard, distant, with a coldness that made Frank uneasy. Something was wrong, but he preferred to chalk it up to his own thoughts, thinking that perhaps he was being too sensitive. "What do I serve you today, Frank?" Ethan's voice sounded harsh, devoid of the usual warm tone. Frank chose not to give it importance and responded with a smile. "The usual, Ethan. A cup of coffee and a slice of your famous apple pie." However, Ethan's hands tightened, and Frank noticed how the owner squeezed the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. "I'm afraid that won't be possible today, Frank," Ethan said in a dry tone. "We have run out of cake." Frank frowned, bewildered. From his seat, he could clearly see a freshly baked cake on the counter, just a few steps away. "But Ethan, there I see one," he began to say, but Ethan's voice rose abruptly, interrupting him. "I said there's no cake, Frank, and we're actually going to close early today. You're going to have to go." The silence grew thicker, and Frank froze, trying to take in what was happening. Never in his years visiting the restaurant had he received such treatment. Around them, the other customers moved uncomfortably in their seats, some averting their gaze, and others observing the scene with surprise and morbid curiosity. Slowly, Frank rose, his hands shaking slightly. "Ethan, I don't understand. Did I do anything to offend you?" Ethan twisted his face into a sneer and replied, "You've done enough just by coming in here. I don't serve people like you in my establishment. Now leave before I have to call the authorities." The word struck Frank like a physical blow, pulling him back, his eyes wide open, filled with pain and disbelief. For a moment, the memories of his youth came back to his mind, a time when such treatment was common. However, this was different. This came from Ethan, a man Frank had considered almost like a friend. As he made his way toward the door, his shoulders slumped. A young woman at a nearby table stood up and raised her voice. "This is not right," he said, his voice trembling. "You can't treat him like that." Ethan turned to her, his face flushed with anger. "This is my restaurant, and I run it the way I want. If you don't like it, you can leave too." The young woman hesitated, caught between the desire to defend Frank and the fear of confronting Ethan. In the end, he sat back down, embarrassment reflected in his eyes as he watched Frank leave the restaurant. When Frank walked through the door of the restaurant, the place was filled with murmurs. Some of the customers quickly paid their bills and left, unwilling to support such an obvious act of discrimination. Others remained in their seats, either because they agreed with Ethan's actions or too surprised to move. But Ethan had no idea that his act of prejudice that day would unleash a series of events that would forever change his life and that of his community. As Frank walked back to his truck, pain and humiliation enveloped him like a mist. What had started as a normal day had turned into a deeply bitter experience. He climbed into his vehicle, his trembling hands gripping the steering wheel, and stood there for a moment, staring straight ahead without really seeing anything. The offense he had just received hit him in waves, arousing a mixture of sadness and anger. But gradually something inside him began to change. As the initial anger dissipated, Frank felt a spark of determination ignite in his chest. He had served his country, had worked hard all his life, and knew that he could not allow such an injustice to go unanswered. He started the engine of his truck, his mind already devising a plan. Ethan Barnes perhaps believed the story would end here, but Frank was determined to prove him wrong. In the restaurant, Ethan also felt the repercussions of his actions. Several of his regulars had left before finishing their meals, throwing disapproving glances at him. Others, though silent, seemed uncomfortable, and the usual atmosphere of the place was tinged with a palpable tension. But Ethan, with a stubborn expression, justified his actions in his mind, clinging to the old beliefs he had inherited from his father. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Alex Mitchell, Frank's son and a respected senator, was getting an urgent call from a family friend. When they told him what had happened at Ethan's restaurant, Alex's fury was immediate and deep. Although he was known for his work in civil rights and veterans support, he never thought his own father would be exposed to such blatant discrimination in his own community. Alex hung up the phone, his thoughts already swirling around what he could do to confront the situation. With his position and influence, he had the means to take matters into his own hands, but he knew that simply seeking revenge could further inflame tempers and divide the community even more. Alex took a deep breath, determined to use this incident to promote real and lasting change in the town that had seen his father grow up. Back at the restaurant, Ethan continued to serve the few remaining customers, although his day had already been altered. As time passed, murmurs of disapproval and critical looks seemed to take their toll on his security facade. Deep down, a sense of uneasiness was beginning to settle in his stomach. Despite his own convictions, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. News of the incident at the restaurant spread through the town like fire on dry grass. People gathered on street corners and patios, whispering about what had happened. Frank Mitchell was a well-known and beloved figure, and many couldn't believe that Ethan, whom they also considered a friendly neighbor, was capable of such an overt act of discrimination. But there was one in particular who, upon hearing what had happened, felt an indignation that he could not ignore. In his office in Washington, Alex sat, thoughtfully, as he pondered how to approach the situation. He knew that his intervention could bring national attention to the issue, but he was also aware that he had to handle it with prudence. With a serious countenance, he picked up the phone and began to make a few calls. Ethan Barnes had no idea what was about to happen, but Alex was determined to teach him an unforgettable lesson, and above all to make it clear that there was no place for hatred in that community. As the sun set over the small town, it seemed that a storm was about to break out. Ethan's actions were about to collide head-on with the determination of a son fighting for his father's dignity, and when the storm passed, nothing would be the same for that small community. The story of Frank Mitchell and Ethan's diner would soon become the center of a profound transformation, teaching a lesson that would resonate beyond the town's borders. At dawn the next day, the small town was full of rumors. The story of what happened at Ethan's diner had spread quickly, and by the time Ethan arrived to open his business, he found a group of people gathered outside. Some held makeshift signs with messages of equality and anti-discrimination, while others watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen. Ethan tried to push his way through the crowd, his face flushed with rage and frustration. He managed to open the door with trembling hands, ignoring the comments around him. He tried to carry out his usual routine, but the atmosphere was unusually heavy. Every time he heard the tinkling of the bell, his heart raced, waiting to see Frank, or worse, the police. However, the morning passed without major incidents, which began to give him a false sense of calm. He thought that perhaps things would calm down on their own, but just as the restaurant was starting to fill up for lunch, the doorbell rang once more, and this time the visitor chilled it out. Standing at the entrance was a tall, graceful man, with a presence that seemed to fill the whole place. He wore an impeccable suit and an expression of seriousness that made everyone in the restaurant look at him with respect and curiosity. Ethan could hardly believe his eyes when the man introduced himself. "I'm Alex Mitchell. I think we need to talk about what happened here yesterday." The colour disappeared from Ethan's face when he heard the name. He had heard rumours that Frank had a son who worked in politics, but he never imagined that the powerful man in front of him was his son. Although he felt intimidated, Ethan's deep-seated pride and prejudice didn't allow him to show it. "Look," he began harshly, "I don't know who you think it is, but this is my establishment, and I have the right to decide who I serve." Alex looked at him with a neutral expression, though his eyes revealed a dangerous gleam. "Is that so?" he replied softly, though his words carried a weight that set Ethan back. "And on what basis do you deny service to a respected veteran like my father, someone who has served this country for decades?" Ethan, already feeling the pressure of the other customers' gazes, crossed his arms. "I don't have to explain myself to you or anyone else," he replied harshly. "His father and people like him are not welcome here. End of story." Tension in the venue increased, with some patrons watching with a mixture of horror and fascination. Alex remained impassive, though there was an intensity in his gaze that forced Ethan to take a step back, almost involuntarily. "Mr. Barnes," he said in a controlled but firm voice, "I had hoped to have a rational conversation about this, but I see it won't be possible. So let me be clear. What you did yesterday is not only morally unacceptable, but it's also illegal. And I plan to use every resource at my disposal to make sure he faces the consequences of his actions." Ethan was speechless for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. What does that mean?" he stammered, trying to hold on to his usual bravery. "You can't do anything to me. This is my business." Alex's smile was cold, without a hint of compassion. "Oh, Mr. Barnes," he said in a tone that barely concealed his contempt. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. I'm not just Frank Mitchell's son, I'm a US Senator, and I've dedicated my career to fighting the kind of hate you showed yesterday." Alex's last sentence left Ethan pale, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. He had expelled the father of a senator, a man with enough power to make his life very difficult. Alex looked at him one last time before turning to the door. "This is not over," he said in a firm voice as he walked out. "You'll be hearing from me very soon." As soon as the door closed, the restaurant was filled with murmurs. Ethan stood motionless behind the counter, slowly processing the monumental mistake he had made. As Ethan froze behind the counter, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink deep into his mind. In an attempt to justify himself, he recalled the teachings and rigid values that his father, Walter Barnes, had instilled in him from a young age. For the first time, however, he began to question whether those values were really benefiting him, or if, on the contrary, they were leading him to ruin. The day progressed, but the atmosphere in the restaurant remained tense and full of murmurs. Customers kept coming and going, some watching him with silent disapproval, and others avoiding any eye contact. Elsewhere in town, Frank Mitchell sat in the living room of his home, surrounded by photographs and memorabilia from his time in the military. He looked at an image of him and his late wife on the day he returned from the war, both with faces full of hope for the future. The discrimination she had suffered at Ethan's restaurant had stirred up old wounds, reminding her that the fight for equality was far from over. Just then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered his thoughts. An instant later, the door opened, and Alex entered the room. Frank rose to hug his son, sharing a moment of quiet comfort. Both felt the weight of recent events, each with their own grief and their own outrage. As they settled into their seats, Frank looked at Alex with concern. "How did it go?" he asked, knowing that his son had gone to confront Ethan. Alex clenched his jaw before answering. "As we expected, Dad. He is not going to change his posture easily, but don't worry. We're already taking action. I will not let what he did to you go without consequences." Frank nodded, though his face reflected a mixture of sadness and determination. "I just want him, and everyone who thinks like him, to understand that we are not less than anyone else, that we deserve respect, just like anyone else." As Alex and Frank discussed what had happened and the plan to address the situation, the impact of the incident continued to ripple through the town. As the news spread, more and more people began to question their own attitudes and beliefs. Ethan, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the immediate impact of his actions. Some of his most loyal customers stopped showing up at the restaurant, and those who still came avoided exchanging glances with him. However, the weight of his decisions was still not enough to make him fully reconsider. Although he was beginning to experience the early consequences of his prejudice, his pride and his father's teachings still held him firmly in his position. In the solitude of his empty restaurant, Ethan kept telling himself that he had done the right thing, that he was standing up for the values he had inherited. But deep down, a sense of doubt was beginning to emerge, even though he refused to accept it. Meanwhile, in his office, Alex continued to work on the plan to transform the impact of the act of discrimination into an opportunity for positive change. I knew that this was not just a personal affront, but a manifestation of a much deeper problem in the community. Determined not to let the incident become a mere passing scandal, Alex met with local leaders and family friends to present them with a vision of what could be achieved in the village. His idea was not only to confront Ethan, but to transform the restaurant itself into a symbol of unity and reconciliation. As he spoke, the enthusiasm of those present grew, and what began as a plan to defend his father's dignity turned into a community mission. Alex's determination and commitment to civil rights inspired many of the attendees, who were eager to support the cause and help build an inclusive and safe space for everyone in town. Ethan had no idea what plans were underway, but the unrest in the village was growing by the day. Rumors about the incident continued to grow, and opinions were divided. While some supported Ethan's actions, many more began to question the old beliefs that were still prevalent in the community. Even Linda Ruiz, Ethan's trusted waitress, began to feel a heavy burden of guilt for not standing up for Frank in the moment. To her, the situation was a test of her own principles, and she was willing to do something about it. As night fell, Linda decided to confront Ethan. When the restaurant was empty, and they were both clearing the last tables, she plucked up the courage and looked him straight in the eye. "Ethan," he began, his voice firm but with a tone of sadness. "What you did to Frank was wrong, and you know it. There are people in the village who will not come back because they do not want to support discrimination." Ethan avoided looking at her and continued cleaning, but Linda didn't stop. "You've built this restaurant with your own hands, and I know you're proud of that. But do you really want the legacy of this place to be hate? There are other ways of doing things, Ethan. You could make amends for what you did, apologize. Maybe it's not too late to fix things." Ethan stopped his movements for a moment, as if Linda's words had reached some part of him that he didn't want to recognize. However, pride and stubbornness still dominated him, and he simply muttered something unintelligible before returning to his tasks. Linda looked at his hardened face and felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. He wanted Ethan to understand the damage he had caused, but he knew that the transformation must come from himself. Finally, with a sigh, he put the rag down on the table and left the restaurant, hoping that his words would plant at least a seed of reflection. The next morning, when Ethan arrived at the restaurant, he found a thick envelope under the door. He picked it up with trembling hands, and when he opened it, he discovered a formal document. It was an offer to buy the restaurant, an offer considerably higher than the market value. The offer was anonymous, made through an unknown law firm, and contained a note at the end that read, "This offer is temporary and requires your immediate departure from the site, in addition to an agreement not to open another business in the area." Ethan looked at the document with a mixture of surprise and confusion. He knew that his restaurant hadn't been as successful as other years and that he'd been struggling to keep it afloat. However, the idea of selling it was painful for him. It was his family's legacy, the place where his father had taught him all about business and where he had spent much of his life. But this offer was tempting and gave him a way out of the growing tensions he had been facing since the incident with Frank. As Ethan tried to come to terms with this decision, the town was in a whirlwind of activity. Alex had begun hosting community meetings, engaging local leaders, veterans, and activists interested in transforming the restaurant into an inclusive space. The idea was to buy the place and turn it into a gathering place for the community, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel welcome and find an atmosphere of respect. As the plans progressed, Alex became more and more immersed in the vision of this new restaurant, which they planned to call the Table of the Veterans. It would be a tribute to veterans of all races and beliefs, and also a symbol of the reconciliation they sought to achieve in the town. Imagining the potential of this space, Alex was filled with enthusiasm, convinced that it could change not only the lives of the people in his community, but also serve as an example for other peoples. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, Ethan was still debating internally. The loneliness in his business, added to the disapproving looks and the loss of customers, began to take their toll on him. Though he was reluctant to admit it, a part of him knew he had made a mistake, but the weight of his father's teachings and his own pride kept him trapped in his old beliefs. As the days went by, Ethan felt his world crumbling around him. The restaurant was getting emptier, and those who still went were distant. It was not the kind of emptiness he was used to, but one filled with silent looks of judgment, as if everyone present was carrying a silent sentence about their actions. In every customer who left without saying goodbye, in every awkward silence, Ethan felt the growing condemnation of the community. Finally, one night, after closing the restaurant, he sat alone at one of the stalls, staring at the empty space. He recalled the afternoons when the place was full of life, laughter, and lively conversations, and he wondered if he could ever regain that peace. The offer to sell was still in his pocket, burning into his conscience as a constant reminder of the opportunity to escape the pressure he felt. While Ethan meditated in his solitude, Alex continued to push the project to transform the restaurant. The community meetings were a success, and more people joined the cause, convinced that the veterans' table could be the change the town needed. Among them was Linda, who strongly supported the idea, feeling proud to be able to participate in a change that would help heal the wounds caused. The next day, when Ethan arrived at the restaurant once again, he made up his mind. He opened the envelope, reviewed the terms of the offer, and with a sigh, picked up the phone. "Hello," he said in a tired voice as he spoke to the law firm. "I'm Ethan Barnes. I'm calling for the offer to buy my restaurant. I accept it." As he hung up the phone, a strange mixture of relief and sadness came over him. He had made a decision that, in some way, he felt liberated him, and at the same time meant the end of an era. As Ethan hung up the phone, he felt the weight of his decisions finally begin to release him, though he knew that freedom would come with a painful process. For generations his family had managed the restaurant, and he had grown up among its tables and counters, learning his father's lessons. But he also understood that, by holding on to old beliefs, he had sacrificed the community he once valued. Ethan fell silent, letting the reality of his choice settle deeply. Meanwhile, Alex and community leaders welcomed the news. They knew that the road to reconciliation and change in the village would not be easy, but the first obstacle was overcome. The purchase of Ethan's restaurant would allow the veterans' table to take shape and serve as a place of gathering and unity for the entire community. Alex, along with the team members, began planning the transformation of the place, giving it a much more inclusive and welcoming purpose. News of the restaurant's sale spread quickly through the village, and with it came rumors about plans for its renovation. Some speculated that it would become a modern cafe. Others said that it would be a center for events, but the truth was revealed on a sunny Saturday morning when the community gathered for the grand opening of La Mesa de los Veteranos. Alex and Frank had invited all the villagers to witness the rebirth of a place so meaningful to everyone. When the doors opened, a mixture of amazement and curiosity ran through the attendees. The space had been completely renovated. The walls were decorated with photographs and memorabilia from veterans of various races and backgrounds, honoring those who had served the country. The tables and seats had been restored in warm tones, and the atmosphere was inviting for peace and reflection. The centerpiece was a large mural on the back wall, where soldiers of different ethnicities were shown, shoulder to shoulder, in an image of camaraderie and unity. In the center of that mural, two figures stood out: a young dark-skinned soldier and a white soldier, embracing in a gesture of companionship. To those who knew the story, the reference was obvious. Those two men represented Frank Mitchell and Walter Barnes, Ethan's father, who once fought together in the war. The mural captured the hope of a better future, in which differences were overcome by solidarity. Frank made his way to the center of the room and in a firm voice gave a short speech. "This place has been part of our community for a long time," he began, "and today a new stage begins. La Mesa de los Veteranos is not just a restaurant, it is a space to heal, to unite, and to remember that we all deserve respect no matter who we are." Frank's words echoed through the crowd, with many nodding with a mixture of pride and excitement. With every word of Frank, the villagers were filled with renewed energy. The community understood that this restaurant had not only been physically transformed, but was now a symbol of something much deeper. The atmosphere of warmth and inclusion that emanated from the veterans' table was a reflection of the values of respect and understanding that Alex and Frank sought to promote. And then came the moment that no one expected. As Frank concluded his speech, Alex looked up at the kitchen door and said, "And now, I want to introduce you to our new head chef." The door opened, and everyone fell silent when they saw Ethan Barnes appear, dressed in a white apron. His face reflected a mixture of regret and humility, and his shoulders were slightly slumped as he took a few steps forward. Ethan looked up, meeting the faces of neighbours and acquaintances who looked at him expectantly. He took a breath and, in a broken voice, spoke, "I know I'm probably the last person you expected to see here. What I did was a mistake for which I have no excuses. I want to apologise to everyone, and especially to Frank and Alex Mitchell, for the pain I caused you. I've been given an opportunity I don't deserve, a chance to right my wrongs, and I promise to work every day to earn the respect I've lost." For a moment, the silence was total. But then, a pair of hands began to applaud, and little by little the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't total forgiveness, but it was the recognition of a step in the right direction. Ethan, moved, bowed his head in gratitude, feeling that his path to redemption was just beginning. I knew it would be a long and difficult process, but I was willing to take each step with humility. Ethan, for his part, worked in the kitchen with a mixture of gratitude and humility, accepting that he was there not because he deserved it, but because of the generosity of those who had given him a second chance. Every dish he prepared was an opportunity to show that he was committed to transforming his life and, in some way, making amends for the damage he had caused. With every smile she received from diners, she felt her load lighten, even though she knew she still had a long way to go. In the community, the story of the veterans' table began to be seen as a symbol of change and reconciliation, and soon attracted the attention of people outside the town. The idea of a restaurant dedicated to togetherness and respect resonated elsewhere, and people from nearby towns began to visit to experience the atmosphere that had been created in that special space. Ethan's transformation was also a source of curiosity and hope, as they saw in him an example that change was possible. The news of what had happened in La Mesa de los Veteranos even reached the ears of some media. A local news channel became interested in telling the story, and so what had started as an incident of discrimination became a tale of redemption and hope that inspired thousands of people. The interview with Frank, Alex, and Ethan captured the essence of the restaurant's mission: to create a place where everyone could feel welcome and respected, no matter their differences. During the interview, Frank spoke candidly about how painful it had been to face discrimination in his own community, but he also highlighted the power of reconciliation and forgiveness. "I could have been filled with hate," she said, "but I decided it was better to respond with love and show that our community can come together." Frank's words resonated strongly with the audience, and many were inspired to reflect on their own attitudes and prejudices. Ethan, for his part, was visibly emotional during the interview, acknowledging the impact of his mistakes and how fortunate he felt for the opportunity to make amends for his actions. "I can't change what I did," he said humbly, "but I can strive every day to be a better person and to create something positive instead of divisions." His words were well received, and although they did not erase his past, they showed a sincere willingness to continue improving. After the interview aired, the veterans' table became a destination for those looking for inspiration and an example of transformation. People from different cities came to the restaurant to experience his message of inclusion and respect. Alex and Frank's initiative began to have a much broader impact than they had imagined, and they realized that their mission had not only healed their community, but had touched lives far beyond their borders. With the increase in the influx of visitors, the restaurant expanded its operations, but always maintained its essence and initial purpose. Alex and Frank established a mentoring program for at-risk youth in the community, connecting them with veterans and other community members who could guide and offer support. The program became a success, and young people began to see the veterans' table as a place of support and hope. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to work hard in the kitchen, trying to earn the trust and respect of those he had once alienated. Although he knew that full redemption would not come immediately, each day he took another step on the path of reconciling with his community and with himself. Little by little, he began to notice that some of the people who had previously avoided him began to smile or give him a word of encouragement, a sign that his effort was being recognized. The months passed, and La Mesa de los Veteranos established itself as a symbol of unity in the community. Every event, every dish served, and every story shared in that place contributed to healing the wounds of the past and building a stronger foundation of respect and collaboration. For Ethan, Frank, and Alex, the Veterans Table was now much more than a restaurant. It was a constant reminder that change and forgiveness were possible, and that the community that had once been divided by prejudice now found in that place a new opportunity to build a future together. The story of the Veterans Table continued to extend beyond the town's borders. Soon, community leaders and activists from other cities became interested in replicating the model of reconciliation and inclusion that had been born in the restaurant. Always willing to help those who wanted to make a positive change, Alex began receiving invitations to speak at events and conferences where he shared the path he, his father, and Ethan had traveled to transform the place. At one such conference, Alex and Frank were invited by a civil rights organization to give a talk about their experience. The audience, made up of community leaders and activists, listened intently as Alex spoke about the importance of empathy and dialogue in the fight against prejudice. "It's not easy to confront hate with love," Alex said, "but it's the only way to break the cycle and create something better for future generations." Alex's words resonated deeply with the attendees, inspiring them to return to their own communities with a renewed vision. Alex and Frank's presentation made a big impact, and shortly after, the organization announced its intention to create a national community reconciliation program inspired by the Veterans Table. The initiative would focus on helping communities divided by prejudice and conflict, using the restaurant as a model of inclusion and change. Alex and Frank were invited to participate as advisors on the program, an honor they both accepted with humility and gratitude, seeing it as an opportunity to take their message even further. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, life continued to unfold. Veterans in the community met regularly at the Veterans Table to share their experiences and offer support to each other. Young people who once felt lost or excluded found in that place a safe space where they could receive guidance from people with different experiences. For Ethan, every day of work in the kitchen was an opportunity to continue his own process of change, and he slowly earned the respect of those he had alienated in the past. One day, while Ethan was working in the kitchen, he was shocked to see a man in a wheelchair walk in. Although the years and illness had taken their toll on his body, Ethan immediately recognized his father, Walter Barnes. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, and the last time they met, the relationship between the two had been marked by tension and unresolved resentments. However, seeing his father there, a mixture of emotions filled Ethan's heart. Walter scanned the restaurant, looking at the walls decorated with photographs of veterans and the mural depicting the camaraderie among soldiers of all races. As he stopped at the mural, his eyes welled up with tears as he recognized his own young face next to that of Frank Mitchell, his former war partner. Memories of those times crowded into his mind, and for the first time in decades, Walter felt the weight of the prejudices he had held for so long. Ethan approached his father with a mixture of respect and shyness. "Dad," he said softly, "welcome to the Veterans Table." Walter looked at him with eyes full of regret and sadness. "Son," he murmured, "I was a fool. I let hatred take over me. I never thought I would see this place transformed in this way again. You've done something you should be very proud of." Walter's words resonated with Ethan in a way he never would have anticipated. It was the first time his father had openly acknowledged the weight of his own beliefs and how they had influenced his and Ethan's lives. The two men sat at one of the tables, sharing a moment of reconciliation in which old resentments began to dissipate. As they talked, Ethan understood that, like him, his father also carried the weight of his own struggles and traumas. That encounter was an important step in Ethan's healing process. Although he knew that true change would be a long and continuous journey, hearing his father's words and feeling his regret allowed him to move forward with a lighter heart. For him, La Mesa de los Veteranos was not only a restaurant, but a symbol of second chances and the possibility of redeeming the mistakes of the past. The story of the restaurant, and how it had helped heal old family and community wounds, continued to spread and reach more people. Frank and Alex, seeing the positive effect of the Veterans Table in their own town, began collaborating with other local leaders to help implement similar initiatives in different locations. They knew it would not be an easy or quick change, but they were convinced that it was the right path to build a more inclusive and compassionate country. The influence of La Mesa de los Veteranos did not stop growing, and the restaurant soon became a symbol of transformation, not only in its community, but nationally. With each visit of people from other towns, and with each story shared at their tables, the impact of the place was felt in hearts and minds. The idea of a space for reconciliation inspired others to create similar environments in their communities, taking the message of unity and respect far beyond the borders of that small town. One afternoon, while the restaurant was full of customers, Frank watched with a mixture of pride and humility. I saw people of different backgrounds and ages sharing tables, laughing and chatting as if the barriers had never existed. This image was the realization of everything he and Alex had desired in transforming the place, and in that moment, Frank knew that the sacrifice, pain, and struggles he had faced had been worth it. Ethan continued to work hard in the kitchen, and although there were still those who had a certain distrust of him, every day he managed to gain more acceptance from the community. Some began to recognize his effort and to see him as a man who, although he had made serious mistakes, was committed to repairing the damage. Gradually, the community began to see in him an example of redemption, of someone who had left hatred behind to embrace a new vision of respect and understanding. The restaurant also began hosting special events, inviting veterans from different generations to share their experiences and bond with youth in the community. These events were moments of learning and mutual respect, where older generations passed on their knowledge and life lessons, and young people found inspiration in those who had served the country. For many, these gatherings represented an opportunity to strengthen community ties and continue the healing process begun at the Veterans Table. As the months went by, Alex and Frank received an unexpected invitation. A documentary filmmaker had learned about the restaurant's history and wanted to make a film that would capture the transformation of the Veterans Table and the impact it had had on the community. Frank, who wasn't seeking personal recognition, was hesitant at first, but Alex convinced him that sharing his story could inspire others to fight prejudice in their own environments. The production of the documentary brought with it a new wave of attention to the restaurant and the town. The community responded enthusiastically, supporting the project and collaborating to bring the story of the Veterans Table to a much wider audience. For many in the village, participating in the documentary was an opportunity to share their own experiences and show how the restaurant's transformation had impacted their lives and worldview. When the documentary finally premiered at a film festival, the reactions from the public were overwhelming. The story of Frank, Alex, and Ethan deeply moved viewers, who were struck by the sincerity and message of hope that the film conveyed. In each scene, the audience could see the pain and difficulty of the healing process, but also the beauty of forgiveness and redemption. The applause at the end of the screening lasted several minutes, reflecting the impact the documentary had had. Seeing the reception of the film, Frank and Alex felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. They had never imagined that their fight for justice and reconciliation could go so far and touch so many lives. However, the recognition did not alter his commitment to the mission of the Veterans Table. For them, the true measure of success was in every conversation between customers, in every smile shared, and in every story that was told around the restaurant tables. As the restaurant continued to operate, Ethan had an eye-opening conversation with Linda, the waitress who had witnessed his transformation. "I never thought I'd get to this point," Ethan confessed, with a sincerity that surprised Linda. "All my life I clung to ideas that I was taught without questioning them. Now, I see the world in a different way, and while I still have a lot to learn, I feel like I'm on the right track." Linda smiled and patted him on the shoulder, We all make mistakes, Ethan. The important thing is that you are willing to change them and learn. The community sees it, and while forgiveness may take time, we all know you're doing your part. Linda's words gave Ethan a sense of hope and renewed motivation to continue on his path of redemption. As time went by, La Mesa de los Veteranos became a point of reference for both the local community and visitors from other parts of the country. The atmosphere in the restaurant was a mixture of respect and hope, and many people found in that space a reminder of the importance of empathy and mutual understanding. The walls adorned with veterans' memorabilia and the mural of camaraderie among soldiers continued to inspire those who visited the place, and the restaurant came to be seen as a living example of reconciliation. The community began to organize events that went beyond veterans and youth gatherings, including civil rights talks and community dialogue sessions, to resolve conflicts and strengthen coexistence. These events brought together people who might never have met otherwise. Each meeting was an opportunity to learn from each other's history, and for many, it was a space to reflect on the prejudices that still lingered and how they could overcome them. Frank and Alex remained active at these events, always available to listen, guide, and set an example with their own witness of reconciliation. The story of how they had decided to transform an act of hatred into a symbol of hope and unity continued to inspire people. For Frank, every day he spent at the veterans' table was an opportunity to contribute to something bigger than himself, and he was grateful to be able to see his community heal little by little. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to work with dedication and humility. He had gone from owning the restaurant to becoming an essential part of its transformation, and while he still struggled to fully accept the mistakes of his past, he found solace in the gradual acceptance of the community. Some days, he still faced looks of distrust, but he had learned to see those moments as reminders of his commitment to moving forward and gaining the trust of those around him. One day, while Ethan was in the kitchen preparing a special meal for a veterans event, a young man approached him shyly. The boy, who participated in the Veterans Table mentoring program, looked at Ethan with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Is it true what they say about you, Mr. Barnes?" he asked, with the sincerity of one searching for answers. Ethan looked at him, knowing he was referring to his past. "Yes, that's true," Ethan replied, not evading the question. "I made serious mistakes and hurt people who didn't deserve it. But I'm here to change and to show that no one has to get caught up in their mistakes." The young man nodded, seeming to reflect deeply on what Ethan had just said. For him, seeing someone accept their faults and work to improve was a lesson he would never forget. Over time, the Veterans Table began to receive letters and messages from people who had seen the documentary and were inspired by the story. Families, students, and veterans from all over sent their words of support and gratitude, and some even shared their own experiences of reconciliation and personal change. Alex and Frank used to read these letters together, feeling deeply grateful that their effort had touched so many lives. The restaurant's impact reached such a level that community leaders from other states began to visit the place, interested in replicating the model in their own communities. For them, the Veterans Table was tangible proof that reconciliation and unity were possible, even in difficult contexts. These leaders sought advice and guidance from Frank and Alex to implement similar programs, and many returned home with renewed hope and concrete plans to make a difference in their own towns. Time passed, and the Veterans Table was established as a symbol of change and forgiveness. The restaurant's story was included in books and publications, and more people knew it as a lesson in the power of empathy. For Frank and Alex, the restaurant's success wasn't measured by the number of visits or applause they received, but by the lasting impact they made on the lives of those around them. One day, while Frank and Ethan were in the restaurant before opening, they shared a moment of reflection. "I never imagined we'd get this far," Frank said, looking at the mural with eyes full of emotion. "But I'm grateful that we took this path. What we've built here is bigger than any of us." Ethan nodded, moved, and replied, "Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Frank. I'm here because you gave me the strength to face myself and change." As time went on, the story of the Veterans Table continued to touch lives in unexpected ways. One day, Alex received a call from an international human rights organization that wanted to nominate the restaurant for an award for its contribution to reconciliation and social justice. The news surprised Alex, who never imagined that the project would have such a broad impact. Although he was honored, his greatest satisfaction was still the change he had seen in his own village. The nomination generated even more interest in the restaurant, and visits increased, with people from different cultures and backgrounds arriving to see firsthand the place that had witnessed such a profound transformation. Each visit was a reminder of people's ability to change, and how a single act of empathy could have lasting repercussions. For Frank and Alex, seeing people from different parts of the world united in the same space was a validation of their mission. During one of those visits, a group of students from a nearby university arrived at the restaurant. One of the students, deeply moved by the message of the Veterans Table, approached Frank and thanked him for his bravery. "You have taught us that it is possible to create real change," the young man said. Frank humbly replied, "The real courage was not mine, but that of the entire community that decided to join this project. This is not the work of one person. It is the result of what we can achieve together." Ethan was continuing his process of growth and redemption, and while he knew that the trust of the community was something that needed to be earned day by day, he felt that he was going in the right direction. During his time at the Veterans Table, Ethan had met many people whose stories taught him about resilience and the ability to forgive. With each interaction, he felt his understanding of the world and himself expand, and that made him value the opportunity he had been given even more. One morning, while cleaning one of the tables after breakfast, Ethan noticed a card that someone had left on the counter. The card contained a brief note of thanks, and in it, the author expressed how his visit to the Veterans Table had helped him to face and leave behind old family quarrels. Ethan stared at the card, feeling a surge of satisfaction as he realized that the change in his own heart had helped inspire others. The community also began to recognize Ethan's effort, and although there were still some reservations, many saw in him someone who had embraced the opportunity to transform their life. For those who had known him for years, his change was proof that forgiveness and redemption were possible. Instead of seeing Ethan as the man he had been, they began to see him as someone willing to learn and contribute positively to the community. The impact of La Mesa de los Veteranos continued to expand, and soon a publisher became interested in publishing a book on the restaurant's history. The book, written in collaboration with Frank and Alex, chronicled each stage of the site's transformation, from the initial painful incident to the creation of a symbol of hope and unity. When the book was published, it received a warm reception, and many people found in its pages inspiration to work on the healing of their own communities. One afternoon, Frank and Alex attended a book signing in a nearby town, where they were able to interact with people who were moved by the story. One of the attendees, a war veteran, approached Frank and expressed his gratitude. "Her story has given me the strength to reconcile with some people from my past," the man confessed. Frank moved, shook his hand and replied, "Sometimes reconciliation requires more courage than any other battle. I am honored to know that our story has inspired him." With each passing day, the mission of the Veterans Table was reaffirmed. For Frank, seeing how the restaurant continued to generate positive change was a constant reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always an opportunity to create light. And for Ethan, every smile, every kind word from a customer was a confirmation that the path of redemption was possible, even if it took time, humility, and perseverance. As time progressed, the Veterans Table became an emblematic space for those seeking reconciliation and peace, both internally and externally. Stories of people visiting for inspiration began to fill the restaurant, and Frank and Alex were honored to be a part of that change. One day, while reviewing letters of thanks and messages of support from various parts of the country, Alex looked at his father with a smile. "Dad, did you ever imagine that something like this could happen here?" he asked. Frank shook his head, an expression of humility and gratitude on his face. "I never thought that our small town could be the center of something so significant," he replied. "But I'm glad to see that we made the right decision. Transforming this place has given us more than I could have imagined, and if that has helped others, then all the effort has been worth it. For Frank, every letter, every testimony was a reminder that even the smallest act of compassion can have an enormous impact. Meanwhile, Ethan continued in his own process of change. His work in the restaurant's kitchen had become a way to express his commitment to the community and his desire for redemption. Every dish he prepared, every smile he received from customers, was a small validation of his effort. He knew that there would still be those who would not forget the incident, but he was determined to move forward, showing by his actions that his change was real. One day, during a veterans' meeting at the restaurant, an older man approached Ethan and watched him silently before speaking. "I didn't think I'd ever see this," the man said, referring to the transformation of the veterans' table. "But it's good to see that you can change. I congratulate you, Ethan. It is not easy to admit mistakes, and even less to face them with the humility that you have shown." Ethan felt a mixture of pride and humility, and thanked the man sincerely for his words. The events organized at La Mesa de los Veteranos continued to attract more people. There were dialogue workshops on inclusion, round tables with community leaders, and mentoring sessions for young people. Each activity was designed to foster understanding and create bonds between people, reminding them of the importance of empathy and respect. The community felt renewed, and many thanked Frank and Alex for their commitment to transforming the space into something so precious to everyone. The restaurant's impact continued to resonate, and soon the idea of expanding the initiative to other communities came up. Inspired by the success of the Veterans Table, some local leaders began discussing the possibility of opening similar restaurants in their own towns while maintaining the same focus on unity and reconciliation. Frank and Alex were invited to participate as advisors on these projects, and they were honored that their story could help others. Ethan was also invited to participate in the planning meetings for these new spaces. Although he was nervous at first, knowing that there were still those who doubted his transformation, he accepted the invitation as an opportunity to share his experience. Over time, he began to see these meetings as a way to contribute in a positive way, and many of the participants listened to him with respect, recognizing his effort to change and his commitment to the mission of the Veterans Table. During one of these meetings, a young community leader approached Ethan and thanked him for his testimony. "Your story has shown us that redemption is possible for anyone," the young man told him. "We are starting a similar project in our village, and knowing that you have achieved it gives me hope that we can also succeed." Ethan felt great satisfaction when he heard these words, and he realized that although his path had been difficult, it had been worth it. As these new projects got underway, the story of La Mesa de los Veteranos became a symbol of transformation in other communities. Each restaurant that opened its doors in the same spirit of inclusion and reconciliation strengthened the idea that change was possible. Frank, Alex, and Ethan were deeply moved to see their experience inspire so many people, and reaffirmed their commitment to continue working for a more inclusive world. Finally, as the Veterans Table continued to function as a space for healing and reconciliation, Frank and Alex understood that the project had exceeded all their expectations. For them, the real reward was in the bonds they had helped build, in the people who had reconciled with their past, and in the community that was now coalescing around a message of respect and empathy. They knew that their mission wasn't over yet, and that, as always, each day at the restaurant offered new opportunities to learn and heal. With each passing day, La Mesa de los Veteranos continued to strengthen its identity as a place of healing and togetherness. The veterans who frequented the restaurant began to see it as a second home, a space where they could share their stories without fear of judgment, and where new generations could learn from the past. Frank and Alex noticed that while the restaurant was still a place for eating and gathering, its purpose had expanded tremendously. It was now also a center of support and learning for everyone. Ethan, for his part, had found in his work a way to give back to the community. For years he had run the restaurant under his father's values. But now, seeing the positive impact of La Mesa de los Veteranos, he understood that there was a better way to do things. Every smile, every thank you, was a reminder that he, too, had changed. And while he couldn't erase the past, he felt at peace knowing that he was building something meaningful for the future. One day, during a community meeting at the restaurant, a woman stood up to share her experience. She talked about how, after a visit to the veterans' table, she had found the courage to reconcile with a family member with whom she had been estranged for years. His story moved everyone in the restaurant, and in the end he received warm applause. For Frank, hearing those kinds of stories was confirmation that his decision to transform the restaurant had had an impact beyond what he had imagined. The documentary about the veterans' table continued to gain popularity and was soon screened at film festivals and community events in various parts of the country. People watching the documentary were inspired by the story of reconciliation and the courage the community had shown in confronting their own prejudices. For Frank, each screening was an opportunity to spread the message of unity and show the world that even the smallest places could be agents of change. During one of those screenings, Ethan was invited to talk about his personal experience and the transformation process he had experienced. Nervously, he stood up before the audience and shared his story. He spoke of his mistakes, how he had come to recognize his prejudices, and the opportunity he had been given to redeem himself. "The veterans' table taught me that it's never too late to change," he said. "I hope that, if someone else is caught up in hatred or fear, they can find in this story the strength to come out of that darkness." Ethan's words resonated deeply with the audience, and at the end of his speech, many came forward to thank him for his honesty and bravery. For him, each of those moments was a small victory, one more step on the path of reconciling with himself and with the community. He knew that his story had been a constant learning process, and he was grateful to be able to share it and perhaps inspire others to make their own change. Over time, La Mesa de los Veteranos became a role model for other restaurants and community spaces. Visitors shared their experiences and brought their teachings to their own communities. Gradually, other restaurant-inspired spaces emerged, and many of them took the same approach of inclusion, respect, and reconciliation. For Frank and Alex, each new place that opened its doors in this spirit of unity was a confirmation that the work they had done was really important. Ethan also became involved in expanding the mission of the Veterans Table, participating in workshops and training programs where he shared his experience. He taught others about the importance of questioning inherited beliefs and confronting one's own prejudices. In these workshops, his testimony became a powerful tool for change, and many young people and adults listened to him attentively, understanding that the path of redemption was possible, although not always easy. Each return to the Veterans Table after these trips reminded Ethan of the special place that had become in his life. What had started as a space for work and personal transformation was now also her home. He knew that the restaurant represented not only his own change, but also that of the entire community that had decided to move forward and build something better for everyone. In one of those moments of reflection, as Ethan finished cleaning the kitchen at the end of the day, Frank came over and offered him a cup of coffee. The two sat quietly for a moment, each deep in thought. "I never thought this would be possible," Ethan finally said. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it, and now I see that what we built here is something I couldn't even imagine." Frank smiled and replied, "We all deserve the opportunity to be better, Ethan, and you have taken advantage of it." Over the years, La Mesa de los Veteranos cemented its reputation as a place of peace and reconciliation. The younger generations of the village grew up hearing the story of the restaurant and the change it had inspired, and for them, the place became a symbol of unity and hope. The community was also strengthened by the many activities and events held there, and each of these gatherings helped to create deeper bonds among its members. Ethan, who had once been a symbol of divisions, had now earned the respect and admiration of those who knew him. Over time, even the most skeptical began to recognize that his change was genuine and that he had embraced the values of inclusion and respect that defined the Veterans Table. Her story became a constant reminder that change is possible, and her example inspired others to question and reflect on their own biases. One day, while the restaurant was particularly buzzing with a community event, Frank watched Ethan from across the room. He noticed how Ethan conversed with clients and collaborated with the team, moving with a calmness and confidence that contrasted with the man he had once been. Frank took great satisfaction in seeing how Ethan had transformed his life, and he knew that even though the road had been difficult, it had all been worth it. As the afternoon progressed and the event drew to a close, an older woman approached Frank. "This place has changed our lives," he told her, with a sincere smile. "Thank you for turning an act of hate into something beautiful." Frank thanked him for the words, knowing that the restaurant had accomplished much more than he had imagined. He knew that the true strength of the veterans' table lay in the people who made it their own, in those who found in that space a place of healing and growth. Alex, on the other hand, continued to travel to share the restaurant's history at conferences and events. Although his life in Washington kept him busy, he always found time to return to his hometown and collaborate on restaurant projects. Each visit was an opportunity to reconnect with the mission he had started alongside his father, and for him, the veterans' table remained a source of inspiration and purpose. As Alex and Frank worked to expand the restaurant's impact, new allies and collaborators began to join their cause. Civil rights organizations, veterans groups, and social activists saw the veterans' table as a role model, and many offered their support to continue replicating its success in other communities. What had begun as a simple response to an act of discrimination had morphed into a nationwide movement. Over time, even the international media became interested in the story of the veterans' table. Documentaries, articles, and interviews helped bring the restaurant's message to a much wider audience. For Frank, every interview and every mention in the press was an opportunity to remind others that no matter how divided communities may seem, there is always the possibility of uniting them through respect and empathy. Ethan was also invited to participate in some of these interviews, and with each account of his personal story, he found a way to continue healing. Talking about his transformation and the mistakes he had made in the past helped him free himself from the burden of guilt that had once consumed him. Now, instead of running away from his past, Ethan bravely faced it, knowing that his story of redemption could inspire others to change. One day, while Ethan was walking through town after a long day at work, a young man approached him and thanked him for his story. "Thank you for teaching us that change is possible," the young man told him. "You have given me hope that I can also be a better person." Ethan, touched, thanked him sincerely. These types of gatherings reminded him that every day at the veterans' table was an opportunity to demonstrate his commitment and help others believe in the power of transformation. As the years passed, La Mesa de los Veteranos remained a fundamental pillar in the community. For Frank, Alex, and Ethan, the restaurant had become much more than a workplace. It was a living testament to the human capacity to change, to forgive, and to build something beautiful out of pain. And as they continued to work day by day, they knew that their mission was not yet over, that there would always be new opportunities to inspire and to heal. The years continued to pass, and La Mesa de los Veteranos remained a constant symbol of hope and redemption. The restaurant thrived, not only as a business, but also as a hub for the community and an example of what can be achieved when forgiveness and empathy are allowed to guide change. Over time, entire families began to see the place as a site of emotional pilgrimage, where they could share their stories and learn from the past. For Ethan, the veterans' table was his salvation. What had started as a second chance had become his life mission. Every time someone looked at him with a smile or thanked him for his work, he felt a peace that was unknown to him before. He knew he had done things in his past that he wasn't proud of, but seeing how the community had decided to give him a second chance was his constant reminder that change was real and powerful. One day, while Ethan was serving customers, a group of children ran into the restaurant and sat down at a table near the mural. They looked at the images with fascination and asked their parents about the soldiers they saw on the wall. Their parents would tell them the story of the restaurant, how it had started, and how people with different beliefs and experiences had come together to create a place of respect and unity. Seeing those children, hearing about the importance of empathy and reconciliation, filled Ethan, Alex, and Frank with satisfaction. Meanwhile, Alex and Frank watched as their community had evolved. The village, which once seemed divided, was now a place where inclusion and respect were valued. Differences were no longer a reason for separation, but for enrichment, and the veterans' table was the symbol that had made this transformation possible. For them, Seeing how the restaurant had become the heart of the community was an accomplishment that surpassed any other recognition they could have received. One day, Frank decided to organize a big celebration at the restaurant to commemorate the anniversary of the opening of the Veterans Table. He invited the entire community, and people from nearby towns also came to join in the festivity. The restaurant was filled with laughter, music, and gratitude, and during that night, every corner of La Mesa de los Veteranos vibrated with a sense of unity and belonging that was palpable. During the celebration, Frank, Alex, and Ethan took the floor and thanked everyone present for their support and for making the restaurant's mission possible. Frank, in an emotional voice, recalled the challenges and pain they had faced to get to that point, but also spoke of the strength the community had found in their own ability to forgive and build a better future. His words resonated with each person present, and the applause he received was a sign of the gratitude that everyone felt. Ethan also took the microphone, and with a mixture of humility and emotion, thanked the community for the opportunity to change. "I know many of you doubted me," he confessed, "and they were right to do so. But every day here has been a lesson in humility and gratitude. They have allowed me to be a part of this mission, and for that, I will be eternally grateful." His voice trembled with excitement, and as he looked into the crowd, he saw faces of acceptance and support. A confirmation that although the road had been difficult, he had managed to reconcile with those who had once viewed him with distrust. As the night wore on, the celebration continued to be filled with conversation and laughter. People shared their memories and stories of how the restaurant had touched their lives. For some, the Veterans Table had been the place where they reconciled broken relationships. For others, it had been the place where they had found support in difficult times. Each story was a testament to the strength of community and everyone's ability to contribute to positive change. At the end of the night, when most of the guests had left, Frank, Alex, and Ethan stayed in the restaurant, silently staring at the empty tables and the mural on the wall. They knew that the work was never complete, and that every day at the Veterans Table was an opportunity to do something good. But they also understood that they had accomplished something extraordinary, and in that moment, they felt a deep peace. Finally, Alex looked at his father and Ethan and said, "This all started with a single act of kindness and a desire to change. Today, we have shown that a place can be much more than just a business. It can be the heart of a community, a symbol of what is possible when everyone decides to walk together." That night, as they closed the doors of the restaurant, the three of them understood that La Mesa de los Veteranos was more than a place. It was a legacy of hope, proof that reconciliation and forgiveness can transform lives and that it is always possible to build something beautiful out of pain. They knew that although their story had come to a close, the restaurant's mission would continue in the hearts of all who had been touched by their message. And so, as they turned off the lights for the last time that night, they left knowing that the Veterans Table would continue to be a beacon of hope, a place where people could find comfort, healing, and most of all, a reminder that there is always a second chance for those who are willing to change.